The Florida Panthers are in the Stanley Cup Final for the second consecutive year. Armando Velez of Locked On Florida Panthers joins us to discuss how they got there and what to expect in the final round. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here. Welcome, everybody, to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, a very happy Armando Velez, as his team is in the Stanley Cup Final. And Armando, I got to say, the Panthers team defense really impressed me in this series.
Yeah, team defense for the Panthers, getting them to this point with it's crazy because when you compare the different runs for the Panthers from last year to this year, I mean, they've only played one extra game going into the Stanley Cup Final this year, but it's crazy because it doesn't really feel that way, because by the time they got to the Stanley Cup Final, they were pretty beat up. Eetu Luostarinen didn't even play in the final round for the Panthers going into it. Aaron Ekblad had broken had fractured his leg in round one, and the Panthers were just hobbling going into the final. And for the Panthers this time around, they say they're at least healthier, but it's really showing on the ice, especially with how they're able to protect the middle of the ice, suppress shots for the opposition. It was really round by round by the Panthers of just eliminating superstars for the opposition. I mean, eliminating Nikita Kucherov, David Pastrnak, Artemi Panarin. Panarin didn't get a goal until it was too little too late in Game 6 of the Rangers series too. And every series you allowed different guys to beat you, but it didn't really phase the Panthers. I mean, round 1, it was Steven Stamkos. Round 2, it was Jake DeBrusk. Round 3, it was Alexei Lafreniere and Vincent Trocheck. But even in the final game, in the clincher, the Panthers didn't even allow a shot on goal by Lafreniere nor Vincent Trocheck. So it really comes down to when the further it gets to the series, the Panthers have been able to outpace the opponent. And even with sluggish starts to first periods, they are slowly but surely getting to their game and wearing out the opposition. And for the Panthers, their only 2-game losing streak in the entire playoff run was between games 2 and 3 of the conference final, and both of them happened to be overtime, losing in overtime. And prior to that, they won 11 straight overtime wins, going ever since they lost in Game 6 of the first round back in 2016 against the Islanders.
Let's talk Sergei Bobrovsky. He looks on top of his game right now. How important has he been for this team's run?
It's been incredible, and for the Panthers, ever since Game 1 of the second round against the Boston Bruins, he'd only allowed more than 2 goals once, and that was Game 3 where where the Panthers lost in overtime too. So even when the opposition breaks down, and the Panthers are still able to get goals when necessary too. But it's really about how the Panthers just are able to keep the puck out of their end, the first pass out, the breakout, a quick chip. So even when there's a forechecker coming in, you're still able to reset everything into the neutral zone for the Panthers. And I mean, just battling it out too in front of the net. I mean, you got to give credit to the guys like Gustav Forsling into the mix too. I mean, this is a guy who just signed a contract right before the trade deadline, but even he was in the system for the Panthers for 3 years prior as a waiver pickup from Carolina. This is his 4th team ever since he was drafted in the 5th round in 2014. So I mean, you have that, and also for the Panthers, just guys who are just situationally aware. I mean, Nico Mikkola in the last 2 games, if you look at how the Panthers finished with 1-goal games, instead of dishing it out for the Panthers, he's going to the corner in their own end and running the time out for the Panthers so that they don't take any risks. So their risk profile, they know how to assess it for them, and really they know really about the mental game that it comes when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs.
You talk about the mental game. How important was the experience they gained last year to helping this team get back to the finals this year?
Crucial. I mean, a good amount of guys left. Guys like Radko Gudas was especially a big one that the Panthers lost in the offseason. For them, that was a big one on their blue line. But I mean, you bring in guys like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who is a veteran, hadn't really won much, but you bring him in, and even the first 16 games when Ekblad and Montour were out, I mean, you saw him being on that top power play unit too, and going back to Gustav Forsling, he's had different defense partners too. But it's also really about adding guys who had been there before, like a Vladimir Tarasenko, who had won a cup, a 30-goal scorer, but even guys who had played with other superstar players in previous stops, like an Evan Rodriguez who played with Crosby, McKinnon too. So it's more than just the guys who had been there last year, but going into this year, I mean, Matthew Tkachuk had a lot of points last year in the postseason and even in the regular season, but he wanted to make sure that he really honed in on his defensive game too. And even if the points aren't there, Matthew Tkachuk, when he's on the ice, the puck is more on the Panthers' end too. Even if it's not finishing in a goal. And Barkov, you look at the stat sheet and you look at PIM for him, it's a career high for him. But Panthers fans don't care, because his career high, he's also hitting more. Paul Maurice calls him a goon for how tough he is on pucks. I mean, he has a Selke trophy to his name, but I mean, just that different experience, because there was a lot of questions even prior to 2020 about, can you win with a guy like Sasha Barkov in your lineup too. So getting that experience, and it's crazy what a Brad Marchand stop on a breakaway in Game 5 of Round 1 last year has had the rippling effects to the Panthers, and now it's back-to-back years in the Stanley Cup final.
So there are two teams left as we record this, Dallas and Edmonton. Is there one of those teams, I'm not going to say that is easier, but is there one of those two teams that you think the Panthers have a better matchup with?
It's funny, when I was asked the question of who do I prefer, Dallas or Edmonton, my answer was just one word: yes. That was my one answer. So, but as far as but seriously though, when it comes to who the Panthers might have an advantage, more of an advantage over, I would say it would be Edmonton, based on blue line and also goaltending. I mean, the Panthers went through a gauntlet this playoff run. Vasilevsky, Swayman, Igor Shesterkin. Those are two Vezina Trophy winners and one guy who is going to be knocking on the door for a Vezina Trophy in the future, in Swayman. But I mean, when you think about the ups and downs with Stuart Skinner and the questions of whether you can win with him. I mean, Calvin Pickard even started playoff games for the Edmonton Oilers too. But I mean, got to give credit to the Oilers too. Their penalty kill has been outstanding this postseason. Evan Bouchard is a coming out, a little bit of a coming out party. He's like Edmonton's version of Gustav Forsling. He had a Canadian market, so he's going to get more of the limelight there. But also, even in the preseason, I predicted the Dallas Stars to win the Stanley Cup, not thinking that the Panthers would return. But there's a little bit of they're a little bit banged up with Chris Tanev on the other side of things, but also up and down in their top line. I know Roope Hintz is a little banged up too, but you have guys who can score in him. Jason Robertson, young guys like a Wyatt Johnston into the mix too. Logan Stankoven. I mean, Miro Heiskanen there too. I mean, there's so much depth on the Dallas Stars, even with their injuries too. So I mean, Jake Ottinger, he's likely going to be on the U.S. Olympic team and in the USA team for the Four Nations face-off too. So I would say if the Panthers did have an advantage over one of the teams, yeah, I know Connor McDavid, you have the best player in the world and the second best possibly in Leon Draisaitl. But I mean, when it comes to up and down the lineup, I think that the Panthers do have the depth advantage over the Edmonton Oilers. I think they are the favorites regardless of who they face against. But if there's more of a wider gap, it's them over Edmonton.
All right. Well, we'll see who they end up playing and how they do. I know you'll be there to cover it every step of the way. Armando, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and how they could find you on social media?
They can find the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube, it's Locked On Panthers. And if you hear the introduction, you hear me emphasize the word Florida. Yes, because Florida has a hockey team, and the state of Florida has had five straight years of a team making the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's a great time for this sport growing in this state. So that's the reasoning behind all of that. But they can follow me personally at MondoMan12. They can follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers.
All right, Armando, thanks so much.
Thank you as always, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Hockey fans, you can use your knowledge of the NHL and the sport of hockey on FanDuel. Just head over to FanDuel and check out the odds. You may want to bet on who's going to win the Stanley Cup, who's going to be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner. Maybe you want to bet on each individual game of the Cup final. You can check out the odds for that and much, much more on FanDuel. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.